All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the podcasting session with me today, PBL and podcasting. So a couple quick logistics things. Again, that link should get you to where you need to go. If it's not loading right away, it might just be the Wi-Fi being a little slow. But if you need access to anything before we go, just feel free to let me know. Also, my other two sessions are on the same site there too. So if you want to just grab that stuff while you're there and hop into another session, feel free to do that. So the other quick thing is that if you guys are on like social media or Twitter or anything like that for professional learning, ETT Innovate, it looks like a lot of people are using that to share things out. That's something that I just like to do as a practice with conferences because there's no way you can get to everything, because there's so many different concurrent sessions. So a lot of times I'll just like the day after a conference, go through the feeds, see what people are sharing out, see some ideas folks have. And go. I even do that for conferences I don't go to, so sometimes you can just get a lot of good ideas from those. As far as contact info, if you want to connect with me on one of those platforms, it's at tomdriscoll.edu. It's on Twitter and Instagram, and then tomdriscolledu.com is where I share a lot of my resources. Super quick background. I was a high school social studies teacher for 8 years in 2 public school districts. I moved over to become the digital learning director for a regional school district in Rhode Island, the Bristol-Warren Regional School District. I was there for 6 years. Started working with EdTechTeacher on a part-time basis for a while. And then just this last summer, now I'm a full-time instructor with EdTechTeacher. I joined the team this summer. So the session today, what I tried to do is frame it around PBL. But I think that really these ideas around using audio in the classroom, they can kind of transcend a lot of different instructional approaches, right? So even if you're not doing a full-blown PBL unit, I think a lot of the tools and strategies we'll share today can help. If you do have a strong background in PBL and you do quite a bit, actually let me just get a quick read of the room. How many people have done like full-blown PBL units before? Okay, perfect. How many of you guys have used audio as like your final product? Okay, perfect, good. So you guys have some background in that. So really, that's kind of the main goal of this session is how do you use some of the new tools for that to ramp those up. But for everybody else, even if it's not part of a PBL, I think there's a lot of usage here. The other thing I'm going to try to do with this session is, again, since this is the first time we've had a chance for a lot of us to meet with a group together, I'm not just going to fill up the hour with me talking about stuff, right? So I'm sharing a lot of this stuff out right at the beginning. I'll go through my spiel, but I really want to give you guys a lot of time to just kind of brainstorm ideas with your groups, right? So I think that's kind of the best use of our time here. So really, I'm just going to share some resources, some ideas, set the table, and then let you guys take it from there. So first thing is so we're on the same page with PBL. I know there's a lot of different variations of it, but we like to use at EdTechTeacher a lot of the work that's referenced through like the Buck Institute. Sometimes people call it HQ PBL, just high quality PBL units. And essentially it's basically any type of inquiry-based unit or lesson where it's sustained over time. And it's not just a project at the end, right? It's something that they learn by doing throughout the project. Usually they have a driving question, something along that nature. We don't need to go into the whole framework, but I like this graphic from New Tech Network. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this before, but I think it's a really good, even if it's a kind of simplistic, a traditional unit versus like a PBL unit. Right, and the reason why I like this is because, when I first started teaching, I was definitely in that top level, right? I would go through my history lectures, we'd do some quizzes, and then at the end, I'd do a really fun project and bring it all together. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's still a good way to teach, but when you think about PBL or any inquiry-based project, you have your project launch. You basically start the project as you start the unit, and they uncover the material, they learn it throughout. And if you look at this, the other thing that's not that intimidating, I think, by this model is that you're still doing a lot of the same activities, right? So you're still doing your research, you're modeling, you're reading, you're having discussions. So you're not completely reinventing everything you do in the class. It's just how you sequence it and how you frame that, right? So you're kind of building towards this final culminating project. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit, and I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Is a lot of this is going to be like if you were to create like a podcast as that culminating event or that culminating project. But I also think the use of audio can be used throughout for like brainstorming, for iterating on an idea, for giving kids feedback. So I think that this can be used in a few different phases of it. So as far as PBL and podcasting, the reason why I think audio and PBL go really well together is one, the public product part. Right, so a good PBL lesson typically has some type of public-facing product. And a lot of times people either do like a presentation or like a video. But I think like at this point, like one, I'd say, but sometimes kids are just sick of making videos, right? Like it's kind of like video fatigue. I remember when I was first digital learning director, like I was the guy running around with the iPad and the green screen with kids making all this. I love that stuff. But I mean, some of this stuff gets a little tired over time. As much as I love things like Kahoot, right? Some kids have been doing Kahoot for like 7 years now, right? This actually, my son's in 5th grade, and he showed me this YouTuber. It's called a Kahoot Rockstar or something like that. It's like a YouTuber. It's a pretty good rap, actually. But these kids have like grown up with some of these things, and they're just getting tired of it. So I think the public product being an audio podcast, for some kids that would be a little bit of a novel solution. And podcasting's taking off, right? I mean, I think as a platform, audio storytelling, podcasting, I don't think it's ever been as popular as it is now. And then one thing that I admit I'm not too up on, but it's the social audio. Has anyone jumped into any of that before? That's kind of like, what's the name? Like Clubhouse. I think Spotify has their own version of it. So essentially, it's like social media, but through audio, and people having threaded conversations with each other as opposed to like tweeting and putting pictures up. So that's almost like the next wave of social is audio. So I think getting them into that ahead of the game and having them learn how to do some of those techniques could be really helpful. And again, that brings in the authenticity of it too. Like they're creating something that's real. Like they really could make a podcast with a lot of the tools that are out there right now and publish it out like on the App Store. All right, so just to get into some of the logistics, I always like to frame projects like this. We've been doing this for a while. If you've been to some of our EdTechTeacher events, we like to think of it this way when we're thinking about PBL or inquiry projects. A lot of times I suggest, especially if you're new to these types of things, especially if podcasting is new, when you think about the outcome, what are kids making? I highly suggest doing like same product, same target. Like what are they creating and why are they creating it? Because what happens, and I've made this mistake myself, I'll do a new project, I'll make a choice board, I'll have all these new technologies, and since I'm still relatively new to them, it's a nightmare for me to support everything. Right, so if you're doing your first podcast with your kids or your first audio project, just stick there. And then as you get more comfortable, then you can add in more choice where maybe everybody's making a different style of product with a different medium for a different audience. So this is kind of like the end game if you want to get there for choice, but I would say especially if you're new to podcasting, start with keeping it more of like a walled garden of resources. So the next few slides, these are more just for you guys to explore a bit, but it's about why podcasting and education. It's a few different takes from teachers in the classroom that have used it over the years. So actually that slide, yeah, so those two are the more important ones. So again, more of a takeout package, but what I'm going to ask you guys is just take a few minutes together with your table. And I know some of you guys have done podcasting in the classroom. If you have created a podcast or an audio project, maybe share with your group what you've made or why you've done that. If you haven't before, use this as a quick, like, why would you do this with your kids? Why an audio project as opposed to a video or a poster or some other type of presentation? All right, so we'll have 3 folks share out some ideas. What were some things that you're brainstorming at your table, why you could use this or how you might use it in the classroom? You 3 folks. Any ideas, thoughts, how you could use it, or examples of how? Yep.
Done like after kids have done a personal narrative, they will record themselves reading their personal narrative.
Yeah, so personal narrative podcast audio. Excellent.
Yeah.
What tool did you use to use that?
We have our district has a subscription to WeVideo.
Oh, excellent.
WeVideo has just an audio version. Okay. You don't have to do a full video, but you can just record yourself.
Yep. That is an excellent tip. So if you didn't hear that, the tool that she used for the audio was WeVideo. believe it or not. And a lot of folks don't realize that you can use WeVideo, even though it's for video, just to create audio files. And it's collaborative too, right? You can have multiple kids on the track, I think.
Maybe. I forget if you can do it on the audio. I know you can while you're editing a video.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great one. I'm going to get to tools in a second, but just so I don't forget, so WeVideo is a good option that sometimes people don't think about. But then the other one is Soundtrap. That actually, it seemed to be it was more designed for like music teachers, but it actually has a great podcasting tool kind of built into it. So that's another one to keep on the radar. I'm actually not even sure I put that in the slide deck, but make a note. Although I think that's subscription, right?
Yeah.
So that's,
Both of them are, I think.
yeah. So all the stuff that I'm going to show in my slide decks here are free. But if you wanted like the more premium stuff, WeVideo and Soundtrap. Point of caution about WeVideo though, their consumer product is not really designed for kids. Right? Meaning if you don't pay for the WeVideo for schools, it's not really FERPA COPPA compliant. So just kind of keep that in mind. I was one of the people that kind of messed that up a little bit. But older kids, I think it's fine if they're over 13, 12 or 13. But I think with younger kids, it's a little bit dicey. I think, yeah?
You ever use Screencastify?
I haven't used it just for audio. Has anyone used it for audio?
I haven't used it, but I do know you can.
Okay, so is it just a setting, just record audio?
Yeah.
Or, okay. Sure, yeah, and I know a lot of districts purchase the Screencastify district-wide subscription, so that's great. And even if you didn't, I think it's a 5-minute cap, but frankly, that's fine. Like, 5 minutes is long enough for some of these projects. Because even think logistically, like, if kids are making 15, 20-minute podcasts and you have 120 students, like, that's not feasible to even listen to all of them. So anyway, so yeah, that's a great point. So we just referenced WeVideo, Soundtrap, and Screencastify as some initial options. We'll do one more person of an idea. So that was a personal narrative. What's one more idea of how you've used it or could use it in the classroom? Yep.
I've used Flipgrid for lab reports.
Excellent. So you've had just the audio overlay.
Actually, no, I did the audio and the video.
Yep.
Just, I gave the kids bullet points that they needed to hit on.
Right.
They got to write a script, and they did a lab report based on the project they just completed.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought Flipgrid up too, because what's one of the main reasons some kids, especially like middle school kids, don't like Flipgrid? Like if they're opposed to it, what's one of the things they don't like? Their faces on the video, right? But you don't have to, right? So there's the screencast feature now with Flipgrid where you could just have like a graphic up and they just do a voiceover. So in a way, you could use Flipgrid for audio too. Just use the screencast tool.
What about like Adobe Spark video? I mean, you don't think the kids just do a presentation and it's their voice as they go through.
Right.
Is that considered anything like?
Yeah, I mean that's still technically a video, but if it's just audio overlay, it's the same idea. It's still like an audio project with slides. I would even say the same thing if using Screencastify with a slideshow. Even though there are some visual components, it's mostly audio, right? And I think that takes away a lot of that anxiety some kids get of making a video with their face on it. Understandably, I mean, these middle school, high school, elementary tends to be like, oh yeah, let's make a Flipgrid, but some even elementary kids have some issues with that. So I think that's a really good option to give them that almost like an opt-out to audio in the classroom. So if you guys do get a chance, the articles there kind of do a little bit more of a deeper dive onto why they use it in the classroom. If you wanted to check out some student examples, some of these are like on SoundCloud and things, so some of the links might be broken, so I apologize in advance, but there are some really good examples here of students that made podcast kind of like final projects for, I think it was a lot of English projects, but there's a few other ones in there mixed in as well. So if you wanted to hear some of those. And there's actually, of course, it's called the Student Podcast. So if you guys wanted to check that out, it's actually sponsored by Soundtrap of all people, but ListenWise, I don't know if you guys are familiar with ListenWise. I think it's part of, and it's like an NPR offshoot or something like that, but it's audio for the classroom. And it's more like a teaching resource, but they sponsored this website. They were pushing out a lot of stuff, but of course, like if you look at the date, it kind of stopped May 2021 or May 21st, 2020, which was of course when everything went upside down. But I would still use that as maybe a quick overview, because what they do is, what's nice about this website is they have snippets of the students' podcasts, but they also interview the teachers and ask them how they did it in their classroom. And they also have a lot of elementary examples, so I'm sure we have some elementary folks in here, so think about how you might want to do that with your elementary kids. Okay, so we're going to get to the actual tech part of this, because I'm sure a lot of you guys have some questions on that part. One second. Okay, so, one more thing before I forget to that. A lot of teachers that have done this in the past, and I tried to do it a little bit with my history students one of my last years in the classroom, is give them some examples of real podcasts. Just have them listen to one. Right, because a lot of kids, they've maybe never listened to a podcast before. Some of them are more designed for students. This was actually a teacher that created different styles of podcasts with examples. This is a little bit more designed for high school students. Like, how are hipsters, coffee, and internet culture connected, right? So that's like a driving question, I guess, of that podcast. But having them listen to some, like StoryCorps is one. But that gives them a little bit of an example of how you might want to set that up. I also put a link to the bottom of this teacher's website, The Ultimate Guide to Teaching Podcasts. So she has a lot of stuff there if you want to check that out. Okay, so creating audio. I'm going to start with the simplest stuff first, right? Especially for the younger kiddos. If you want to just do the simplest, like just audio, I just want to get audio. Especially on a Chromebook, it's not always easy to get audio on a Chromebook, believe it or not. Like there's no built-in audio app unless, do you guys know of one on a Chromebook? It's really no voice recorder. So the one that we actually like to recommend for a lot of stuff, it's a website called 123 Apps. It has a audio recorder, it has a video recorder, it has a lightweight editor. You don't need student accounts. There's no FERPA COPPA stuff that you have to deal with. So if you just need an audio file, a lot of times we point teachers to that. If you're on an iOS device, some people just use the built-in audio recorder on the iOS. So that's kind of your default. But if you want to look for another app, Voice Memo is the kind of like the built-in one, but Voice Recorder Pro, it's a free one that has a little bit more that you can work with. And Otter, actually a teacher brought this up to me during one of our summer workshops. Has anyone used Otter before or heard of it? It's interesting. I'm not sure if they actually have an education product specifically, but the teacher that pointed this out to me, what they like is that it does a live transcription for text. So as they're talking, it also creates a text file of everything they said that you can then edit it after, which I thought was a pretty cool feature, right? So it does live audio plus transcription, if you want to check that out. So those are kind of like the lightweight free tools. So these are the ones that are a little bit heavier duty. They have more options. You probably heard of most of them. The one that's kind of like taking off like crazy is Moat. Who's here heard of Moat? Okay, so almost everybody in the room has heard of Moat. This one, I don't know, maybe 2 years old, maybe less. It came out of nowhere. As far as I know, there's been no issues as far as student data privacy, as far as I know. But you still may want to run it by your tech director if it hasn't been pushed out yet. It's a Chrome extension that basically you can tag anything with audio, a website, a Google slideshow. Actually, I'll show you guys later. There's a template you can use to create a mini podcast right on a Google slide with Moat. Super simple, right? So that would be probably the easiest way to get your kids to practice podcasting. Synth is another one. I don't know if you guys remember, there was a tool called Recap a while ago. Do you remember Recap? It was basically like Flipgrid, but then Flipgrid won, so Recap died, and they created Synth. So essentially, Synth is kind of like micro podcasting. Really interesting platform, and that one's gone under the radar. I feel like a lot of people don't know about that one. But in a way, you create a channel for your class, and then you can have like a threaded audio discussion. That's a little bit less of a podcast and more of like what I was talking about before, like the social audio. And again, that's a new thing. I haven't jumped in on it yet myself, but that's kind of more of the audio discussions that you can take a look at. And then if you want kids to make a real, legit podcast, I highly suggest Anchor. Has anyone here made an Anchor podcast? Excellent. Anyone want to give it a shot, like how you've used it, what you've made with it? Anyone want to jump in? Yep.
So I did two. I did one that was solo first time.
Yep.
The class I was taking, and then as a group in that same class, we had to create one where we all came on we were all in different locations, remote locations, and we all had to come on together to speak. And then when it was done, I used some of the editing tools, and it was pretty self-explanatory, actually.
Right.
Really easy.
Yeah, so two things that Anchor's got going for it, kind of like what you just mentioned. One, it literally pushes it out to the podcast platforms. Like it'll push it out to Apple, Spotify, all that, just like with one click, right? So remember, this is if you want it published. If you don't want it published, don't use Anchor, right? Because that's the point of Anchor, is to publish it. And there's a built-in editor that's kind of like drag and drop. You don't need to know all different audio editing tools necessarily. It's pretty straightforward. Yep.
I use Anchor with my students, and some of them don't want it published because they don't want to be on Spotify, but they can download it.
Okay.
Just send the link to the teacher, so it doesn't have.
Oh, so they just export the file, they don't publish it.
Yeah.
Is there a way to create it without it going live?
Yeah.
Okay. You'll have to show me later because I don't know how to do that. Okay, perfect. We just learned that. So if you want to build there and then just export the file out and don't put it on a platform. Oh, that's how you do. So you just don't connect it with any. Okay. But you have to do that from the start, right? Because if you connect it, I found it's hard to disconnect once you connect them, I think. Because I tried to. Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Got it. Yep. So if you guys want to tinker with that later, when you set up Anchor, if you want to do it like what they were mentioning, just don't connect it with Apple, don't connect it with Spotify, and just download the file, and then you should be good to go. Okay, so this is the one I recommend the most if you wanted like a full polished podcast. Okay, so just a couple quick things here. This is more for you guys to explore on your own, but they have a learning hub for Moat with a lot of different resources. Still, I don't think it's updated in a few months, but they're trying to put out more templates that teachers can use with Google Slides. But what I was mentioning before about like using this for a podcast, you actually could create like, or even use their template if you want, and kids could just add like audio files to the slides. And in a way, this could kind of be like a run through, like you practice on the Google Slides, and then as they, do better, you give them feedback, then maybe they do their final product into an Anchor. So that's one thing that you could check out. As far as Synth, this is again one where not as many teachers are using it, but it may be more suitable for what you're trying to do. So maybe you want kids to have more of a discussion and like a show, right? So for instance, when I taught social studies, a lot of times I wanted that back and forth, kind of that civil discourse that I was trying to teach. This is a little bit more designed for that. So this is more of like an audio discussion platform if you want to try out Synth. And then, of course, Anchor. I'll give you guys an example of Anchor as well. Yep.
Can you just talk about like the age level, grade levels that each of these would be like appropriate for?
Right. So Anchor, that especially for elementary kids, that's like the teacher pushing out like a class project. Like I don't necessarily see like young elementary kids going into Anchor and building out a podcast. That's more of like you get the audio files from the kids and then the teacher puts them on. For younger kids, I would say like Moat's easy. Like a lot of young kids use Moat.
Is that an app?
It's a Google extension. Yep, you just install the Moat app and then. Yep. Oh, in iPad, I would just have them use the voice memos or the Voice Recorder Pro. Voice Recorder Pro is easy. Yeah. But then if you use that to get those MP3 files, if you just have them share it through Drive, or once you get the files, it's really easy for a teacher to push them out. I mean, probably upper elementary could pull it off, but I don't see like a first grader jumping into Anchor and producing on it. I mean, it's just realistically it'd be pretty tough. So that's more of like a teacher-led project. Does that help? Okay. All right. So the next. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Back on slide 21.
Yep.
It looked like that. I was watching the picture and not seeing you and hearing you. Are you talking about the kids storyboarding in a sense?
Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, it's like building out what you would be saying in your podcast, almost like a little script. Yeah, like story, and then you overlay your audio on top of it.
Okay.
Yep. So that's not like one big audio file. It's more of like snippets, and you would play it as you go. So just to kind of see what an example would look like. So I actually this was beginning of the pandemic. My son had a little time on his hands, so we made a Fast Break Blake podcast, right? But he just kind of talked about sports and stuff, and I was fun too. I admit I had fun doing it. But essentially, he would just record the raw audio file. He would like talk to his buddies or whatever, and then we used. I use GarageBand just because we have a Mac, but if you don't have a Mac, Audacity I think is just as good. Audacity is a free editing tool. You don't need any of it though. Like honestly, if you just want to just put the audio up there, because the thing is, on Anchor they have built-in like background loops, and I don't know if you guys listen to like NPR podcasts where like they have the bumper music in between. They have free bumper music that you can just layer in, which is kind of fun. But anyway, so I just put it on there. So me, like a dummy, I just connected everything. And then, of course, third or fourth episode in, my son's like, my friend heard my podcast. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. And he's like, I don't like my voice. I'm like, oh. So, because of course, you get into that age, he's like in 5th grade. And so that's why I said kind of be careful about connecting them, because it's kind of a bear to disconnect them. And I'm still kind of trying to unravel that. But if you do want it actually published out, that's why you don't have to go to Apple. You don't have to go to Spotify. It's just whatever ones you want to connect it to, you upload it to Anchor, and then it just kind of does it for you. I know some teachers too, this is more for just like the exemplar ones. You don't have every kid pushing out to Anchor, but maybe you have an Anchor channel for your class. And maybe you put out like 1 or 2 or however many you want to do. Some schools just have a school Anchor channel, and you do like exemplar projects or student news or something like that. And here's the other thing that's kind of like a hack, right? I don't know if you guys have done this with GarageBand. I think Audacity does it too. If you already have a video that's pretty good, you can just dump it in there and it rips the audio out. And you can just use the audio. Just do a 2-for-1, right? Because you already have like a good video with audio. Just take the audio out and then you can push it into a podcast if you want to. So that's what it kind of looks like on the Anchor platform. So a couple other quick things, and then I'm going to let you guys discuss a bit how you might use some of these tools. The next thing's about actually planning this out. Like, how do you actually design a project like this? And for those of you that have done it, I'm sure you can share some insights. One thing that I definitely underestimated when I started doing this project was, how much I think kind of like storyboarding or scripting is really important. Right? It's kind of like a video project. Like, they need to kind of have that polished, written, ready before they go. But anyway, so here are a few different guides that I think could be really helpful, or just things to consider. First thing, and I think is probably the most important, especially with younger kids, is how public do you want this to be? Do you want it to just be in your Google Classroom, just shared it with you, or do you want it to be out there? If it is going to be out there, just check with your school on what the deal is with that. Because I know they have the media release forms, but I'm not sure how much that covers something like this. This is a different thing, right? So I would definitely suggest, and then you know how parents love to share, right? So say you have a group project. Maybe Sally puts her podcast out on Facebook, and then, the other kid's mom hears it. You know how it works. So just kind of make sure that anybody that pushes it out, what they know. What do you have available? Who's publishing it? How collaborative do you want it? And then who's going to actually create the final podcast at the end? Will it be a teacher created or a student created? So if you want some guides and kind of take out resources, NPR actually has its own training resource materials for people that want to go into podcasting. This is probably a little bit more aimed at secondary. Elementary, it's probably a little bit dense, but that's a link to their project blueprint. It kind of walks you through, if you're constructing a podcast, what are some elements to include. And it has some nice graphic organizers that you can pull out and modify for your students. So that's a really good guide that I recommend that teachers have used in the past. There's also one by the New York Times. They have a planning doc that they put together. And they also have some snippets from podcasts to kind of teach different elements of it. Again, this is a little bit more of a secondary level, but there's a link here. Basically, it's called Teaching Students How to Produce Their Own Podcast. Pretty straightforward, but it's a good resource. I think they had a competition, like a student podcasting competition in the past. I'm not sure if they still run it, but they have a lot of the stuff still available for teachers if you wanted to try that out. So I think between those two, there's more than enough. It's probably too much as far as planning resources, but those are really high quality collections there. All right, so some production tips in publishing. None of this is like you have to have it, but especially if you're a library media specialist, if you're friendly with a library media specialist, these are some of the things that would be helpful to get. You may already have some of these. If you're going to invest in a mic, I think the snowball mics are good. Does anyone have the snowball mics? You've seen those, kind of the round ones. The Yeti mic, it's a Yeti mini mic, right? Those are really good, but again, like you're not going to throw a bunch of those in a kindergarten class, right? Like they can break. So I would say if you're going to work with younger students, the snowballs are the same company, but they're more rugged. I know a lot of music teachers buy them. But frankly, if you're going to get something much cheaper than that, don't bother. Because a lot of the built-in mics are just as good as like a $20 USB mic. Like it's not even worth spending the money on it. Like I would just say maybe get one or two of the good mics and use it for projects. If you wanted to get kind of fancy, if you can get one of these for the class, these are kind of nice. It's called an adjustable arm stand, and you just put the mic on the end of it. The reason why I like those and why some teachers have gotten those, and if you have like a maker space or a media space that has it, it's because it elevates the mic off the table. Because anything that's sitting on a table is going to get knocked over, right? And then also, if you're like typing or touching the table, a mic that's good, what happens? You hear everything, every vibration because it's such a good mic. So having it just kind of elevated, one, keeps it a little bit safer, but two, the sound quality gets a lot better. The other, don't worry about a pop filter. That's just, kids feel cool when they have a pop filter, right? You know, a pop filter is like the thing that comes over on it, so they feel like they're in a studio. It doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, but they're like $8. The sound stuff. So this is important. First off, and I screwed this up. It took me a year of doing remote Zoom PDs to figure out that I had this thing on the wrong setting. A lot of them have a setting where you can get the whole room, or it's like unidirectional. I know this kind of gets in the weeds of it, but double check your mic settings. If you have a whole group, you want it recording everything. If it's just one person, you want it straight on. Because if you have a whole room full of kids and you have it doing the 360 recording, it's going to pick up everything. So you actually, if you can change the settings so it's just going in one direction, that helps. The other thing, and this is super cheap to do, is they have these little foam panels. Has anyone used these before or seen these? They're like little, it's almost like packing foam, kind of. And what you can do is you could even just get like an Amazon box, right? Put the foam inside of it, put the mic, and it's almost like a recording studio. And it's funny, a lot of if you kind of look up how recording artists recorded during the pandemic, that's kind of what they did. They used blankets, they used foam. My daughter loves Taylor Swift, so we watched the Taylor Swift documentary on Disney or whatever. When she recorded that first album, she literally was like in her house. I don't think anybody saw that, but she just had like a blanket over her head. And she just recorded, and that's how she made her studio album at her house. So you can actually make really high quality audio just by mitigating sound with some very simple things like like some of those foam panels or boxes. So that tends to help. And honestly, if you don't have all that stuff, if you just have like a trifold, that's good enough too. Right? Just getting one of those like poster things. All right, so now if you want to really like spice up the audio and get some background sound, some background music, kids love that stuff, right? Here are the best places to get that. The first one, believe it or not, is YouTube. Right? YouTube has an unbelievable audio library built in for free. And the best part about that is it's all copyright friendly. Right? None of it's going to get flagged. So if you go into YouTube, you don't even need to make a YouTube video. Just go into your YouTube account, and then on the left side in the Creator Studio, if you go all the way down, it's going to say Audio Library, and then you can search for all different musics, for sound effects. If YouTube's allowed in your school, your kids have access to this too. So have them just go through. And here's the best thing, you can just download it out of there. Right? You just go in and you download as much of that music as you want, and then you're good. It's all royalty free. They're allowed to use that. There are 3 other websites that people like to use, so if you don't want to go down the YouTube road, Ben Sound, Pixabay Music, and Free Music Archive. All 3 of those are pretty good, high-quality collections, and they're all free. Because again, as much as they'd want to use some of the more popular music, as soon as they upload it somewhere, it's going to get flagged and taken down. Like the algorithms pick it up in like 2 seconds. So we've come a long way since our days of Napster and LimeWire and all that stuff. You guys remember any of that? Okay. This is if you have a kid that's all in. Like you might have a kid that's elementary, middle, especially high school, that's like, I want to do this. I'm into producing music. This is called the Podcaster's Toolbox by PRX. I think it's kind of like an offshoot of NPR type thing, but it's basically a whole website with like this master guide of resources and tools and background sound effects and things to make a really good high quality podcast. So again, this isn't something you're sharing with your just intro kid, but again, if you have a kid that's really advanced that just wants to knock this out of the park, that's a really good resource that you guys can use. All right. I definitely want to give you guys some time to talk. So last thing about editing, you don't have to edit, but if you want to edit, these are the main tools that I suggest. GarageBand if you have Macs, Audacity if you don't have a Mac, Chromebook, apparently WeVideo is an option, Screencastify is an option. I don't think you can do Audacity on a Chromebook, unfortunately. You can't download it. So they're a little bit limited there, but I think those other tools would work. And then if you want to just upload, edit directly on Anchor, Anchor has its own editing. So you can edit on Anchor. These are all resources I just kind of put in here if you wanted some tutorials on how to use each one of these tools, or if you just want to share. They actually have a whole kind of course, how to build a podcast with Anchor that Anchor created. So again, if you just want to give that to kids, that's a nice tool for them. And then this is the cherry on top. If they want to make a really cool graphic for their podcast, right? So you know the show graphic. Canva, if you just type in podcast at the top of Canva, you come up with all these different templates on like podcast styles. So how many here have used Canva before? Oh, almost everybody. Okay. Has anyone tried Canva for education? Okay, good. So for the people that had the hand up and then put their hand down, use Canva for education. It's free. You get all the stuff that they used to have a little money thing next to it. It's gone. Like it's completely free for teachers. But anyway, so if you want to do the visuals, Canva is probably the easiest one to make the visuals with. All right, so I've talked too much. I'm going to give you guys a good 10 minutes before we wrap up. Maybe let's do 8 because I want to give you guys time for the next one. 8 minutes with your group. I know we kind of unpacked a lot, but let's just kind of think through what are some resources, some approaches, some tech tools that you might use to build a podcast in your class, and then we'll kind of bring it back as a whole group.